The morning sun cast long shadows across the massive hangar floor as Sarah Martinez pushed her cleaning cart between the rows of fighter jets. The metallic smell of aviation fuel mixed with the sharp scent of cleaning chemicals filled the air. At 28, she had been working as a maintenance cleaner at Edwards Air Force Base for 3 years, invisible to most of the pilots and crew who rushed past her each day. Sarah wore the standard blue coveralls that marked her as civilian support staff. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and safety glasses hung around her neck. She moved with quiet efficiency, mopping around the landing gear of an F-16 Fighting Falcon, careful not to disturb any of the sensitive equipment or tools scattered nearby. The hangar buzzed with activity as mechanics worked on various aircraft. Sarah had learned to read the rhythm of the place. Morning meant pre-flight checks and last-minute repairs. Afternoon brought the returning pilots, their jets hot from training missions. Evening was her favorite time, when the hangar grew quiet and she could work without dodging rushing personnel. "Watch it, cleaning lady," barked Sergeant Murphy as he wheeled a tool cart past her. Sarah stepped aside without a word, accustomed to being treated as part of the furniture. She had long ago stopped expecting acknowledgement from most of the military personnel. Her job was important, she knew that. Clean hangars meant safe aircraft, and safe aircraft meant pilots came home alive. Sarah's attention to detail was legendary among the few who noticed her work. She didn't just mop floors and empty trash cans. She observed everything with the sharp eyes of someone who understood that in aviation, the smallest oversight could mean disaster. She noticed loose bolts before they fell, spotted hydraulic leaks before they became floods, and always reported anything unusual to the appropriate personnel. Today felt different somehow. The usual chatter among the mechanics seemed more urgent. She overheard fragments of conversation about a difficult training exercise scheduled for the afternoon. Something about simulated combat maneuvers over the desert testing grounds. The pilots seemed more focused than usual during their pre-flight briefings. As Sarah cleaned near the flight operations desk, she couldn't help but notice the weather reports scattered across the surface. Strong winds were expected later, with possible dust storms moving in from the southwest. She had grown up in this desert region and knew how quickly weather could change. The local conditions could turn dangerous without warning. Lieutenant Colonel James Hawk Harrison emerged from the briefing room, his flight suit crisp and his helmet tucked under his arm. At 35, he was one of the most respected pilots on the base, known for his precision flying and cool head under pressure. His call sign, Hawk, came from his ability to spot threats from incredible distances and his fierce protection of his wingmen. Sarah had seen him many times but had never spoken to him. He was part of a different world, one where split-second decisions meant life or death at 30,000 feet. She was just the person who made sure his workspace was clean and safe. Hawk walked past her without a glance, his mind already focused on the challenging mission ahead. He was leading a 4-aircraft formation in a complex air-to-air combat simulation. The exercise would test their ability to work as a coordinated unit against a larger opposing force. Everything had to be perfect. Sarah continued her work, methodically cleaning the area around Hawk's assigned aircraft. She knew each plane by its tail number and had developed an almost protective feeling toward them. These machines carried brave people into dangerous situations, and she took pride in ensuring they had the best possible environment for maintenance and preparation. As she worked near the F-16's landing gear, something caught her eye. A small puddle of fluid had formed beneath the aircraft, barely visible unless you were looking at just the right angle. Sarah knelt down and carefully examined the leak. It wasn't fuel or oil, which would have been immediately obvious. This was clear, almost like water, but with a slightly oily consistency. Her experience told her this might be hydraulic fluid from the landing gear system. Sarah knew enough about aircraft maintenance from her 3 years on the base to understand that hydraulic problems could be catastrophic. The landing gear, flight controls, and other critical systems all depended on hydraulic pressure. She looked around for the crew chief responsible for this particular aircraft. But the hangar was in its usual state of controlled chaos. Mechanics were busy with their own assignments, pilots were in briefings, and supervisors were coordinating multiple activities. Sarah made a mental note to report the leak as soon as she could find the right person. Meanwhile, the leak continued to slowly drip, forming a slightly larger puddle. Sarah placed an absorbent pad under the aircraft to prevent the fluid from spreading across the clean hangar floor. She knew that hydraulic fluid could be slippery and dangerous if left unattended. The morning progressed with typical hangar efficiency. Pilots completed their briefings, mechanics finished their inspections, and support staff prepared for the afternoon training mission. Sarah worked quietly in the background. Her presence barely acknowledged, but her work essential to the smooth operation of the facility. As noon approached, the pace in the hangar intensified. Pilots began their detailed pre-flight inspections, walking around their aircraft with practiced eyes, checking every surface, every panel, every connection. Sarah watched from a distance, marveling at their thoroughness and professionalism. Hawk approached his F-16 with the confidence of a pilot who had performed this ritual hundreds of times. He checked the external fuel tanks, tested the control surfaces, and examined the engine intake for any foreign objects. His inspection was methodical and complete, but like many experienced pilots, he focused on the areas most likely to develop problems. Sarah realized with growing concern that Hawk's inspection route wouldn't take him near the landing gear area where she had noticed the leak. The puddle had grown slightly larger despite the absorbent pad, suggesting the leak was more significant than she had initially thought. She tried to catch the attention of a passing mechanic, but Sergeant Rodriguez was hurrying to address an issue with another aircraft. Sarah's voice, calling out over the hangar noise, didn't carry far enough to reach him. She felt a growing sense of urgency as she watched Hawk continue his pre-flight check, unaware of the potential problem beneath his aircraft. The afternoon mission was scheduled to be particularly demanding. Sarah had overheard enough briefing fragments to know that the pilots would be testing the limits of their aircraft and their own skills. Any mechanical problem, no matter how small, could become life-threatening under those conditions. As Hawk completed his external inspection and headed toward the cockpit, Sarah made a decision that would change everything. She abandoned her cleaning cart and walked directly toward the respected pilot, knowing she was about to cross an invisible line that separated her world from his. Her heart pounded as she approached, aware that interrupting a pilot's pre-flight routine was something that could get her in serious trouble. But her conscience wouldn't let her remain silent. She had noticed something potentially dangerous, and her duty was clear, regardless of military protocol or social barriers. "Excuse me, sir," Sarah called out, her voice steady despite her nervousness. Hawk turned, surprised to be addressed by the civilian cleaner. His expression was neutral but attentive, the look of a professional who understood that in aviation, critical information could come from any source. Hawk stopped and turned toward Sarah, his helmet still tucked under his arm. Up close, she could see the intensity in his dark eyes, the kind of focused attention that came from years of flying high-performance aircraft where every detail mattered. His call sign patch was visible on his flight suit, along with various mission patches that told the story of a distinguished military career. "Yes, what is it?" Hawk asked, his tone professional but not unfriendly. He had learned long ago to listen when someone had something urgent to say, regardless of their rank or position. Sarah pointed toward the landing gear of his F-16. "Sir, I noticed a fluid leak under your aircraft. It's been growing over the past hour, and I think it might be hydraulic fluid from the landing gear system." Hawk's expression immediately became more serious. He followed Sarah back to the aircraft, his trained eyes scanning the area she indicated. The puddle was indeed larger now, and even with Sarah's absorbent pad, the clear fluid continued to drip steadily from somewhere within the landing gear assembly. "Show me exactly where you first noticed this," Hawk said, kneeling down beside the landing gear. Sarah knelt beside him, pointing to the specific area where she had first seen the leak. "It started as just a few drops here, sir. I've been watching it for the past hour, and it's definitely getting worse." Hawk examined the leak carefully, using a small flashlight from his flight suit to peer into the landing gear mechanism. His knowledge of aircraft systems was extensive, and he quickly identified the problem: A hydraulic line connection had worked loose, allowing pressure to escape from the system. "Good catch," he said quietly, then stood and called out across the hangar. "Crew chief, we've got a hydraulic leak on 772. Staff Sergeant Williams, the crew chief responsible for Hawk's aircraft, hurried over with his toolkit. He was a veteran mechanic with 20 years of experience, and his face showed concern when he saw the leak. "How long has this been going on?" Williams asked, examining the problem. "The young lady here spotted it about an hour ago," Hawk replied, gesturing towards Sarah. "She's been monitoring it, and it's definitely gotten worse." Williams looked at Sarah with surprise and newfound respect. "You caught this during your cleaning routine?" Sarah nodded. "I always pay attention when I'm working around the aircraft. I know how important it is that everything be perfect for the pilot's safety." Williams began his inspection of the hydraulic system, using diagnostic tools to check pressure levels throughout the network. What he found made his face grow grave. The leak had caused a significant pressure drop in the primary hydraulic system, and there were signs that secondary systems were beginning to compensate. "Colonel, this would have been a real problem if you'd launched," Williams said. "The primary hydraulic system is down to about 60% pressure. You might have made it through takeoff, but when you tried to lower the gear for landing, there's a good chance it would have failed." Hawk felt a chill run down his spine. Landing gear failure was one of every pilot's nightmares. Without functioning landing gear, his options would have been extremely limited and dangerous. He could have ejected and lost the aircraft, attempted a belly landing that would likely result in serious injury or death, or tried to make it to a base with better emergency facilities. "How long to fix it?" Hawk asked. "At least 2 hours, maybe 3. Williams replied. "We need to replace the entire hydraulic line assembly and test the system thoroughly. This isn't something we can patch up quickly." Hawk realized that his mission would have to be scrubbed or reassigned to another pilot. But more importantly, he understood that Sarah's sharp observation and courage in speaking up had potentially saved his life. The leak would have grown worse during the high-stress maneuvers planned for the afternoon exercise. As Williams called for additional maintenance personnel and began gathering the necessary parts, Hawk turned back to Sarah. She had returned to her cleaning cart but remained nearby, clearly concerned about the situation she had uncovered. "What's your name?" Hawk asked. "Sarah Martinez, sir," she replied. "How long have you been working here, Sarah?" 3 years, sir. I started right after high school. I've always been interested in aviation, even though I never had the opportunity to learn to fly myself." Hawk studied her face, seeing intelligence and genuine care in her expression. "Have you noticed problems like this before?" 8. Sarah hesitated, then decided to be completely honest. "A few times, sir. I always report what I see, but usually to the mechanics or crew chiefs. I've never spoken directly to a pilot before. What made you decide to approach me today?" Sarah looked toward the aircraft, where Williams and his team were now working to address the hydraulic problem. The mission briefing mentioned challenging maneuvers, and I overheard talk about difficult weather conditions. I knew that if there was a problem, today would be the worst day for it to show up. I couldn't live with myself if I stayed quiet, and something happened. Hawk was struck by her thoughtfulness and sense of responsibility. Here was someone who understood the stakes involved in military aviation, despite having no formal training or official role in flight operations. Her dedication to safety went far beyond her job description. "You mentioned being interested in aviation," Hawk said. "Have you ever thought about pursuing that interest more seriously?" Sarah's eyes lit up slightly, but then she shook her head. "I don't have the education or background for that kind of career, sir. I barely finished high school, and college wasn't really an option for my family financially." Hawk made a mental note of this conversation. He had seen many young people with potential who just needed the right opportunity and guidance. Sarah's natural observation skills, attention to detail, and understanding of the importance of safety suggested she might have untapped potential in the aviation field. The maintenance work continued around them as Williams and his team carefully replaced the damaged hydraulic components. Other pilots and support staff began to take notice of the situation. Word spreading through the hangar about the civilian cleaner who had spotted a critical safety issue. Major Kelly Roberts, the squadron operations officer, approached to get an update on the aircraft status. When she heard the story of Sarah's discovery, her expression became very serious. "This could have been a Class A mishap," Roberts said, using the military term for the most serious type of accident. "We need to make sure this incident is properly documented, and that the appropriate people know what happened here." Hawk agreed completely. Aviation safety depended on learning from both accidents and near misses. And Sarah's observation had prevented what could have been a tragic incident. Her actions deserved recognition, not just for her individual contribution, but as an example for others throughout the base. As the afternoon wore on, Sarah tried to return to her normal duties, but she found it difficult to concentrate. The weight of what might have happened kept running through her mind. She had always known her work was important, but this was the first time she had been directly involved in preventing a potential disaster. Other members of the cleaning and support staff began to approach her, having heard about the incident. Some offered congratulations, while others asked questions about how she had known to look for such problems. Sarah found herself becoming an informal teacher, sharing what she had learned about aircraft systems and safety concerns. The hangar's atmosphere had changed noticeably. Personnel who had previously barely acknowledged Sarah's existence now greeted her respectfully. She heard whispered conversations about the cleaner who saved the pilot. And while the attention made her uncomfortable, she was glad that the focus remained on safety rather than personal recognition. Williams completed the hydraulic system repairs as the sun began to set over the desert base. The replacement components had been thoroughly tested, and all systems showed normal pressure and function. The aircraft was officially returned to flight status, though it was too late for the original training mission. Hawk remained at the hangar throughout the repair process, partly out of curiosity about his aircraft and partly because he wanted to continue his conversation with Sarah when the opportunity arose. He found himself impressed not just by her initial observation, but by how she had handled the subsequent attention and questions from various personnel. As the evening shift began to take over the hangar operations, Hawk realized he had an important decision to make about how to properly acknowledge what Sarah had done for him and for aviation safety in general. The next morning brought an unusual buzz to the hangar. Word of Sarah's discovery had spread throughout the base overnight, and several senior officers had requested detailed reports about the incident. Colonel Patricia Hayes, the base commander, had been personally briefed on the hydraulic failure and the role that Sarah's observation had played in preventing a potential catastrophe. Sarah arrived for her shift to find her supervisor, Mr. Tom Chen, waiting for her with an expression that mixed pride and nervousness. As the civilian facilities manager, Chen rarely dealt directly with flight operations, but this incident had brought his department into the spotlight. "Sarah, we need to talk," Chen said, leading her to his small office adjacent to the maintenance areas. "I've had calls from half the base this morning, asking about you and what happened yesterday." Sarah sat down, feeling uncertain about where this conversation was heading. "Am I in trouble for approaching the pilot directly? I know that's not normally how things are supposed to work." Chen shook his head emphatically. "Trouble? Sarah, you potentially saved a pilot's life and prevented the loss of a multi-million-dollar aircraft. The question isn't whether you're in trouble. The question is what we do to make sure other people learn from your example." Over the next hour, Chen explained the various requests that had come in. The safety office wanted to interview Sarah about her observation techniques. The training department wanted to incorporate her story into safety awareness programs. Several pilots had asked to meet her personally, to thank her for her vigilance. But the most significant request had come from Colonel Hayes herself. The base commander wanted to present Sarah with a formal recognition award at the monthly base assembly. This was unprecedented for a civilian contractor, and Chen wanted to make sure Sarah understood the significance of the honor. "I don't need any awards," Sarah said quietly. I was just doing what anyone should do in that situation. That's exactly why you deserve recognition, Chen replied. Not everyone would have noticed what you saw, and fewer still would have had the courage to speak up to a senior pilot about it. Meanwhile, across the base, Hawk was having his own important conversation. He had requested a meeting with Lieutenant Colonel David Park, the squadron commander, to discuss something that had been on his mind since the previous day's incident. "Sir, I'd like to talk to you about Sarah Martinez," Hawk said as he sat down in Park's office. Park nodded. "The civilian who spotted your hydraulic leak. Hell of a thing." "Hawk, the safety investigation confirmed that you would have had complete landing gear failure if you'd launched with that problem. That's what I want to discuss, sir. This young woman has natural observation skills and an instinctive understanding of aviation safety that's remarkable for someone with no formal training. I think we're wasting her potential by having her only work as a cleaner." Park leaned back in his chair, intrigued. "What are you suggesting?" Hawk had spent considerable time thinking about this. "I'd like to recommend her for the base's educational assistance program. If she's interested, she could take courses in aviation maintenance or even work toward becoming an air traffic controller. The Air Force has programs for civilian employees who show exceptional potential. You think she has that kind of ability?" "Sir, I've seen experienced maintenance personnel miss problems that she caught instinctively. She understands that every detail matters in aviation, and she has the dedication to act on that understanding. With proper training, she could contribute at a much higher level." Park made notes as Hawk spoke. The squadron commander had seen many talented people throughout his career, and he had learned to trust his pilot's judgment about character and potential. If Hawk believed Sarah had exceptional abilities, that recommendation carried significant weight. That afternoon, Sarah was surprised to receive a message asking her to report to the base commander's office. She had never been inside the administrative building where the senior officers worked, and the formal atmosphere made her nervous. Colonel Hayes was a distinguished officer with over 20 years of military service. She had commanded flying units in combat, and had a reputation for caring deeply about both mission success and personnel welfare. When Sarah was escorted into her office, the colonel stood up from behind her desk with a warm smile. "Miss Martinez, please sit down. I wanted to meet you personally and hear about yesterday's incident from your perspective." Sarah recounted the events as clearly as she could, emphasizing that she had simply been doing her job and had noticed something that seemed unusual. She tried to downplay her role, but Colonel Hayes was experienced at reading people and could see the genuine modesty and competence that had impressed the other personnel who had worked with Sarah. "I understand you've been working here for 3 years, Hayes said. "Tell me what you like most about your job." 2000. Sarah thought for a moment. "I like knowing that my work contributes to flight safety, ma'am. Every time I see the pilots returning safely from their missions, I feel like I've played a small part in making that possible." Hayes was impressed by the maturity and perspective in that answer. "What would you say if I told you there might be opportunities for you to contribute to aviation safety in a more direct way?" Sarah's eyes widened. "I'm not sure I understand, ma'am." Hayes explained the various educational and career development programs available to base personnel, including civilian employees, who demonstrated exceptional potential. The programs could provide funding for technical training, college courses, or even specialized certification programs related to aviation. "Would you be interested in pursuing additional education if the opportunity were available?" Hayes asked. Sarah's heart began to race with excitement, but she tried to remain realistic. "I would love that more than anything, ma'am, but I'm not sure I have the background or ability to succeed in those kinds of programs." "Miss Martinez, you've already demonstrated observation skills, technical understanding, and professional courage that many people with advanced degrees never develop. The question isn't whether you have the ability. The question is whether you have the commitment to work hard and learn." Sarah didn't hesitate. "Yes, ma'am. I absolutely do." "Everyone." Sarah 7. Hayes smiled and made several notes in Sarah's file. "I'm going to have our Education Services Officer contact you about the available programs. I want you to think carefully about what interests you most, and we'll see what we can arrange. As Sarah left the commander's office, her mind was spinning with possibilities she had never dared to imagine. The idea of pursuing a real career in aviation, of contributing to flight safety in a more significant way, seemed almost too good to be true. That evening, as Sarah finished her shift in the hangar, she noticed increased activity around the flight line. Several aircraft were being prepared for the training mission that had been postponed the previous day due to Hawk's aircraft problem. Hawk emerged from the operations building, once again dressed in his flight suit and carrying his helmet. This time, however, he walked directly toward Sarah's work area instead of proceeding straight to his aircraft. "Sarah," he called out as he approached. She turned from her cleaning cart, still amazed that this respected pilot knew her name and sought her out for conversation. "I wanted to let you know that my aircraft checked out perfectly after the repairs," Hawk said. "All systems are functioning normally, and I'm cleared for tonight's mission." "I'm very glad to hear that, sir," Sarah replied. Hawk looked around the hangar, taking in the controlled activity of pre-flight preparations. Then he turned back to Sarah, with a serious expression. "I also wanted you to know that I've spoken with the squadron commander about you. There may be opportunities for you to expand your role here on the base, if you're interested in pursuing them." Sarah felt a surge of gratitude that threatened to overwhelm her composure. "Sir, I can't thank you enough for what you've done. Just the fact that you listened to me yesterday meant everything." Hawk smiled. "You saved my aircraft, and quite possibly my life. The thanks should be going in the other direction." As Hawk turned to head toward his aircraft, Sarah watched him go with a new understanding of her place in the aviation community. She was no longer just the invisible cleaner who worked quietly in the background. She was a valued member of the team whose observations and dedication contributed directly to mission success and pilot safety. The sound of jet engines starting up filled the hangar as the evening training mission prepared to launch. Sarah continued her work, but now she felt a deeper connection to the aircraft and the people who flew them. Every surface she cleaned, every detail she observed, every small contribution she made was part of a larger mission that she was proud to support. Later that week, as Sarah stood in formation with the rest of the base personnel during the monthly assembly, Colonel Hayes called her name and asked her to step forward. The recognition award she received that day was just a piece of paper and a small medal, but it represented something much more significant. As the applause echoed through the hangar, Sarah realized that her life had changed forever. The quiet cleaner who had always worked in the shadows had found her voice and her place in the aviation community. The future held possibilities she had never dreamed of, all because she had the courage to speak up when she noticed something that didn't look right. Hawk watched the ceremony from his place in the formation, proud to have played a role in recognizing someone whose dedication and observation skills embodied the best traditions of aviation safety. In a profession where attention to detail could mean the difference between life and death, Sarah Martinez had proven that the most important contributions sometimes came from the most unexpected sources. The story would become part of the base's history, told to new personnel as an example of how everyone, regardless of rank or position, played a vital role in maintaining flight safety. Sarah's name would be remembered not just for what she had observed that day, but for what her actions represented about the values and vigilance that kept aviators safe in an inherently dangerous profession. As the months passed, Sarah began her studies in aviation maintenance technology, funded by the base's Educational Assistance Program. Her natural abilities, combined with formal training, quickly made her one of the most knowledgeable and respected members of the support staff. But she never forgot the lesson of that day in the hangar, when a simple observation and the courage to speak up had changed everything.